The first season of Loki ends with a dagger to the chest and a simple note that we would be foolish to forget.
You plunge your blade in my chest and an infinite amount of me start another multiversal war, and I just end up right back here anyways.
See you soon.
The gambit was simple. You kill He Who Remains, and a tidal wave of his variants would be upon you before you ever knew it. The threat was real to Loki. Something about his words just resonated in a way that it didn't with Sylvie, or maybe more likely Sylvie just wasn't ready to acknowledge them. She created a power vacuum, and the first season of Loki ends with our golden boy being shown just how immediate those changes would be.
Archives. Who are you?
Now, the new season has all but spelled out directly the time period that Loki was sent to in this clip. Taking what we've learned at face value, we know this was before He Who Remains wiped everybody's mind with a Rule 42 and changed the narrative of being the leader to 3 robot timekeepers who pretend to act fairly. Now, that could be true, and all of this is simply Loki time-slipping into the pre-wipe past.
And then the timekeepers came along and saved us all.
No.
It's insinuated that what we're seeing is sometime around here, but we're seeing time directly after He Who Remains gives us the gravest warning of all time, and Sylvie just ignores it. It seems like one of the best ways to show off just how powerful this next threat is in a story where time is cyclical and relative is to have the next big bad immediately in power when He Who Remains dies. Because of how we naturally perceive time, we're looking for who the next big bad will be and their rise to power, and the focus has been entirely on Victor, someone who was kind of stepping up to be a team player at the end of his life. It, to me, kind of feels like a red herring, but we don't need to see a large buildup on how they got their power. We know that the threat is real and how scary it was to the most powerful being that we've seen. And this sudden change at the end of season 1, before we got a season 2, it just felt like the next version of He Who Remains was already in power, and I think a big task for season 2 was making us forget that feeling, right? Like right at the end of season 1, that was kind of what the big takeaway was, and I think that they've done that in season 2. We kind of have forgot that feeling and loosely explain it away, but I think that it may just be that straightforward. I think the next big bad is already in power. I think the next big bad has been in front of our faces, and I think the next big bad has been gaslighting us to believe that he has been here this entire time.
Could it be 3 or 4?
400 years.
What? Feels like 1,000, right?
Yeah.
So my theory is that Obi is actually the person controlling the strings and is wearing this ultimate nerdy good guy persona to avoid our prying eyes. Coming off of Everything Everywhere All at Once, a cinematic masterpiece, his character, it was just the good guy, right? Like, he is a good character for it, but what a great way to subvert expectations here. Like, imagine him as a villain giving a speech about the true state of his reality and the universe and how we are a people that need to be ruled, or, saying just like He Who Remains did, you're welcome. I've been running this thing the entire time. You're welcome. He's been helpful this entire time, and maybe it's purely just me with a massive confirmation bias reading into things that aren't there. And hey, that's part of theory crafting. I'm going to shape this theory to the best of my ability, and I would love for you to pick it apart or add evidence in the comments, and together we can find some degree of Socratic method. Enter my agora, and let's talk about this beautiful good boy being an actual devil.
We're all gonna die still.
So let's state again. He Who Remains tells us his variants are coming, and then poof. Season 2 starts, and shortly into it, Mobius takes us to a basement where He Who Remains not sleeping is just slaving away doing some kind of never-ending IT task for the TVA.
So I just keep at it. Forever. No sleep.
Being the IT person in and of itself at the TVA just feels like the ultimate power move. Like, the whole thing is future tech everything, right? Like, it's already such a position of power. But again, our current state, we kind of just culturally just push the IT people to the background. As an IT person, I know what reality is. All right, we run shit. But Ouroboros' introduction as this forgotten relic IT manager is wild, but not nearly as wild as the power that they have explicitly stated he has since that moment. It starts by telling us that he wrote the book.
It's a detailed index of every mechanical classification and maintenance routine in each sector, on each device, and inside every computer program of the TVA. I wrote it myself.
Acknowledging an intimate knowledge of basically everything that is happening here, and then tells us that he actually co-wrote it with He Who Remains, who he then considers a peer.
Yes, I did. But I learned everything I know from a brilliant 19th century inventor named Victor Timely. If we had the resources, he would have been bigger than Einstein.
And then outright tells us that he has disdain for Sylvie's actions, and in turn knows and supports He Who Remains and his conquest and what he was doing here.
It was created when someone killed He Who Remains and released all those branches and ruined my life.
It just feels like a wild amount of information to have for someone resigned to the basement, made to look like he was forgotten about. It seems like he knows everything, and that means his memory probably wasn't wiped with the others. This could be because it would endanger the cycle, but it could also be because he is actually a He Who Remains variant and took power after the other He Who Remains died.
Living in your engineering descriptions.
Me? The way you explain the electric bypass system.
Bypass.
Sylvie even rolls her eyes like, guys, you're patting yourselves on the back here. Can we move this thing along? But we know that this is He Who Remains variant behavior.
For a while, there was peace. Narcissistic, self-congratulatory peace. I love your shoes. I love your hair. Oh, man. Nice nose. Thanks, man. Etc.
To me, it just felt like they were hinting at this moment, told directly to us that this was them teaching each other in a never-ending cycle, but it seems coded like He Who Remains described previously. If this does turn out to be the case, and this is actually two He Who Remains variants kind of doing exactly what the previous scene described, I would have loved if they complemented each other's hair or clothes or something small to just, closer connect these moments, but hey, it may not be, right? Moving on, we have one super important fact that has been repeated a dozen times and shown across the multiple He Who Remainses.
I don't do partners.
We know that they don't do partners. He Who Remains having this person that is essentially his equal is just out of character at this point. They both wrote the guidebook for all the technology that controls this place and the TVA itself. Like, get out of here. It feels so odd that we don't even know what drives Obi at this point. Like, what are his motivations? He is this being beyond time, beyond the need for sleep, able to create devices for controlling time on the same scale that He Who Remains does and did. And he just enjoys the simple life of a basement, forgotten by the world. Like, man, it feels fishy, and it seems fishy, and it looks fishy. So it's probably fishy. It just seems like a security risk at the very least to like a person that fundamentally we know does not trust the world and wipes out even his closest confidants.
Erase her memories.
Are you sure?
Erase all their memories.
The next thing I want to highlight is time slipping. This is an engineer. He thinks like an engineer, and to be clear, we have to assume writers know how to write engineers, which can be a big ask. I'm going to assume that they know an engineer faced with an oddity that they cannot reconcile with across 400 years would probably be pretty curious in trying to understand why or troubleshoot it, or it seems like for me, it would just be in the back of my brain forever, right? If you truly believe that time slipping can happen at the TVA and then it happens, why, right? Why? We don't know why. I mean, especially if you were the person who created all of the technology in this place. This line repeated twice, pointing this out to us with the discovery that you can communicate across the timelines effectively. Why did he never address this or look further into it? He created the device, but never tries to understand why it happened. Why was this line repeated twice and then never brought back in the same way that the other information was? I think it's because the TVA fundamentally changed after season 1, and of course Obi is a variant. And and I think that's all I want to say. Roll clips.
How long have you been here? I don't know. It's hard to say. Time passes differently here in the TVA.
What does that mean?
You'll catch it. I told you time moves differently in the TVA.
It's impossible to time slip in the TVA.
I know, but we just saw it happen.
Yeah. I'm having trouble reconciling that.
It feels like the rules are just changed after He Who Remains died, and that right there just feels like such a massive piece of evidence that the change or the shift in power was this immediate thing, and we're perceiving not the rise of a next He Who Remains, but one that is already in power pulling the strings. As I am wrapping this video up, please hit that like button. This is the kind of a super last minute thought as I'm rounding everything out. It seems like there's just some oddities here that they could explore. It seems like he's a great character to be a good guy. It seems like he's a great character to have a twist at the end where he is actually just the big bad this entire time. But if he's responsible for all the tech that the TVA uses, he is directly responsible for the loom and the systems used to murder countless timelines, as well as the little cubing machine here, and the reason that they have this torture room and the other torture room that we've seen where time literally repeats over and over and over and over again. I think it's possible that this tech comes back in a meaningful way, perhaps being used in a much, much bigger macro sense. Like some of what we've seen may already be in this loop. I think it's also likely that he was the one servicing the timekeepers and could have known about their hidden pseudo-existence, just like he knew somehow about He Who Remains, while no one else did. It may be a stretch, but we have 2 more episodes this season and no big bad has been introduced. Last season, He Who Remains was revealed in the final episode, so it could be another one of those. But it could also be our dear boy OB, the unsuspecting good boy of the decade, turned into, at the very least, a cog in a machine that has sapped free will for eons. Even if he's not the big bad, his hands are dirty. And with that we come to the end of the video. Much love, everybody. Thank you for watching till the end. If you have any thoughts, theories, or anything else you want me to know about your personal life and anything like that, that's what I'm after. Kindly place them in the comments below. Special thank you to Michael Link over on Patreon and the showrunners of Loki, who have been secretly leaking me everything that happens in the next episode. You won't believe how Tony Stark comes back into the equation in episode 6.